Moving on to a note on terminology. Personally, I had kind of veered away, and I think you'll know this, from saying Bollywood, because again, it's sort of predicated that there's that it's derivative of Hollywood, but it's one of those things that's really difficult, because at the same time, and this goes back to just one of the sort of major concerns of the course itself. If the people who are producing that cinema and the people that are watching that cinema primarily, they themselves are calling it Bollywood, that makes it very, very kind of difficult, right? So, it's just something that I guess I'm just kind of still working through and being careful of. But when Varya is talking about, this sort of section on terminology, he is trying to emphasize that sort of point, because one of the other major sort of problems or issues with calling it Bollywood or thinking about it as Bollywood is that we sort of consider it to be kind of monolithic or singular, when in fact it's intensely plural, right? So it's like, as opposed to the U.S., like and this is the problem with like kind of the hegemon, or sort of the, like the normal versus, or the kind of central versus the sort of peripheral, is that we're afforded particularity and diversity. So it's like, let's say if we think geographically, it's like California is its own thing, Florida is its own thing, the Northeast, Middle New England is its own thing, the Midwest is its own thing, Texas is its own thing, Hawaii is its own thing, but then it's like Asia, as if it's just Asia, right? Or just all of India, which is, just kind of unfair and ridiculous and absurd and just not true, right? We know that even like, just Maine is just not the same depending on where you go. It's like, why would that be, why would that be the case anywhere else in the world? If you really kind of pick at, some of the things that we think and assume, it's just sort of ridiculous. But Varya kind of specifically notes the distinction, this is on page 3, between Hindi cinema, which is kind of the sort of the largest, right? Versus regional cinema, and then government-supported cinema, right? Art and middle. And again, I think these sort of distinctions are important because it gets us to think about, like, what is our taxonomy or categorization based on? What are the lines of distinction? We usually think in terms of genres and modes, right? But there are other important distinctions too. He talks about, like, again, just to kind of like challenge this, that there's this sort of like identity crisis, right? That Bollywood is specifically Hindi, right? And populist cinema from Mumbai, so the mainstream kind of cinema. But he also, similar to what I've kind of consistently tried to do, which is like how Asian is Asian cinema if there's money being, if it's like technology and conventions and rules that we get from, Europe and the U.S., funding from, this place in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, like the role of Urdu kind of really problematizes, right, this idea of a kind of stable Hindi cinema, right? And then, of course, colonialism. What do we do with British colonialism of India, which we don't really talk about, really, right? We just don't really talk about. Moving on to history and industry. I'm not going to go through the entire thing, of course. This is just the sort of thing that I don't think like I need to parse this out for you. It's just going to, just read it and sort of go over it. But I think this is a great primer, right, on early film history in general. So, this is the type of work that historians, like you'll see a lot of historians do, just kind of, see how the cinema sort of occurs, I suppose. I appreciate the way that he talks about the context from which Bollywood emerges, and I want to point out that it's hybrid from the start, right? You see here, whether it's adaptations of Shakespeare, again, like the kind of remnants of colonialism, sort of colonial cosmopolitanism, but also the kind of the influence of Hollywood. And also, I've mentioned this before, but the movement of cinema, we think that like 10 years ago is old, but in 1896 the Lumiere brothers were setting up showings in Bombay. Cinema was moving very, very quickly, even before the 20th century, right? Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second, and then we'll talk about a little bit, just some of the main points of the cinema history.